Ethan Grant stood at the edge of the camp, staring intently at the horizon of the African jungle. The jungle was a mixture of beauty and danger, with its dense vegetation, suffocating heat, and mysteries hidden in every corner. For Ethan, this place meant more than just a physical challenge or a scientific mission. It was the home of Kivu, a gorilla he had raised with love and care during the animal's early years. Kivu was not just a gorilla to Ethan. He was part of his story, an extension of his soul. Raised in England, Kivu was more than just an animal under Ethan's care. He was like a son. When the gorilla was young, he depended entirely on Ethan, seeking affection, protection, and even comfort on the hardest days. However, 5 years earlier, Ethan had made the difficult decision to return Kivu to the jungle, believing that there he would find his true place. It had been a farewell filled with tears and hope. Since then, Ethan had often wondered how the gorilla had adapted to the wild. Now, 5 years later, Ethan was back. He had promised himself he would return to check on how Kivu was living. But with that promise came doubts that gnawed at his mind. Would Kivu still remember him? Or had time and the jungle transformed the sweet gorilla into a wild and distant creature? These questions echoed in his mind as he adjusted his backpack, preparing to enter the forest. The jungle was fascinating in its complexity. Gigantic trees formed a natural canopy, almost blocking out the sunlight. Every movement in the vegetation seemed like a puzzle. Was it the wind or a hidden animal? The damp smell of the earth mixed with the fragrance of wildflowers, creating a dense and vibrant atmosphere. To many, this environment was intimidating, but to Ethan it signified a reunion. Even so, his heart was tight with anticipation. He knew the jungle was unpredictable, and the thought of finding Kivu filled his mind with conflicting emotions. What if Kivu had changed? What if the gorilla saw him as a threat, an intruder in his territory? Ethan knew that in the jungle, even the gentlest of animals could become aggressive to protect their space. At the same time, he clung to the memories of those curious eyes that had always looked at him with such trust. "Does he still trust me?" Ethan murmured to himself, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. Deep down, Ethan was not just searching for Kivu. He was searching for a part of himself that he had left in that forest 5 years ago. Every step he took toward the jungle brought him closer not only to the gorilla he loved, but also to answers about the impact of that unique bond on both of them. The journey he was about to embark on was not just a mission to reunite. It was a voyage into the heart of his emotions, his memories, and everything it meant to truly love something enough to let it go. The sun began to rise through the treetops, casting a golden light that barely penetrated the jungle's density. Ethan stood beside his team, watching as the guides organized the last pieces of equipment. Heavy backpacks, radios, supplies, and a first aid kit were being meticulously checked. Every detail was crucial, as any oversight could turn the expedition into a fatal risk. The guides, experienced men accustomed to the mysteries of the African jungle, were discussing the route. Hand-drawn, rudimentary maps were spread out on a rock. Ethan listened, but his mind was already focused on Kivu. He ran his fingers over the brim of his hat, a habit he had whenever anxiety took over. It was as if, somehow, that simple gesture could calm him and prepare him for what lay ahead. "We're ready, Mr. Grant," one of the guides said, interrupting his thoughts. Ethan nodded, grabbed his backpack, and adjusted the straps on his shoulders. He knew the journey would be long and full of challenges, but there was no room for hesitation. "Let's find him," he replied firmly. Soon, the group ventured into the jungle. The heat was suffocating, and the humidity seemed to glue them to the ground. Every step required caution, as exposed roots and uneven terrain could easily cause a fall. The dense vegetation created a true labyrinth, where the sounds of nature grew louder. The chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, and even the hum of insects seemed to form a wild symphony. Despite this, Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the path ahead, alert to any sign of Kivu. After a few hours of walking, one of the guides stopped abruptly. "Here," he said, pointing to the muddy ground. Ethan approached and saw the tracks. Gorilla footprints, large and deep, fresh enough to excite them. He crouched down, running his hand over the mud surrounding the prints, as if that gesture could connect him even more to the moment. "It could be him," he murmured almost to himself. The air around them seemed heavier. The tension grew as the idea of being closer to Kivu became real. Ethan felt his heart racing, but he couldn't let his emotions take over. The determination in his eyes showed he was willing to see this through to the end. No matter what lay ahead, he knew he had to keep going. This wasn't just an expedition. It was a promise he had made, not only to Kivu but also to himself. As they moved forward, the team began to line up behind Ethan, trusting his leadership. He knew that every decision he made could change the course of the journey. "We'll follow the tracks," he said firmly. The guides agreed, and the march continued, now driven by a mixture of hope and apprehension. The jungle seemed more alive and at the same time more challenging with every step. The group advanced slowly, facing vegetation that seemed determined to swallow them whole. Low branches scratched the arms of those who passed, and vines hung like invisible traps. Ethan, with his heavy backpack and sweat dripping down his face, led the way, using a machete to clear the path. Each swing at the vegetation was harder than the last, as if the forest itself was testing his resolve. The mosquitoes were relentless. Even with repellent, they attacked mercilessly, forming clouds around each person. The incessant buzzing was as irritating as the bites, which left their skin red and itchy. Ethan swiped at his neck, trying to fend off the insects, but he knew it was just part of the struggle. "If it were easy, it wouldn't be the jungle," he muttered, trying to turn the discomfort into motivation. The hours dragged on, and fatigue began to take its toll. The group's steps grew slower, their shoulders slumped under the weight of their backpacks. The heat seemed to sap all energy, and the humidity made even breathing a more significant effort. Ethan noticed the discouragement on his team's faces, but knew they couldn't stop. Every pause meant more time for the jungle's dangers to close in. Then, in the middle of the day, something unexpected happened. As they crossed an open area with a river in the background, Ethan heard a heavy noise. He stopped immediately, raising his hand to signal silence. Ahead, a group of elephants was drinking water peacefully. They were enormous, majestic, with wrinkled skin and trunks swaying gently. One of the guides whispered, "They look calm, but if startled, they could attack." Ethan watched the animals carefully. There was something magical about the way they moved, as if they were the true kings of the jungle. The group stood still, motionless, respecting the moment. After a few minutes, the elephants finished drinking and, without haste, disappeared into the vegetation. Ethan exhaled in relief and felt a touch of hope. That encounter, brief as it was, felt like a reminder that the jungle was as full of beauty as it was of challenges. But the jungle offered no respite. That same afternoon, as they traversed a wetter, swampier area, a piercing scream shattered the air. One of the team members fell to the ground, clutching his ankle. When Ethan and the others rushed over, they saw the bite mark, a venomous snake. Panic gripped the group, but Ethan knew they had to act quickly. "Stay calm," he said, trying to contain the tension. Using the radio, he called for help while one of the guides applied an improvised tourniquet to slow the venom's spread. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the sounds growing louder as if sharing in the urgency of the moment. The team stood in silence, waiting for rescue, while the injured man tried to endure the pain. Ethan held his hand, conveying strength with a simple gesture. "You're going to be okay. Help is on its way." After several tense hours, the rescue helicopter arrived, breaking the jungle's isolation with the sound of its rotors. Ethan helped carry the man to the evacuation point, and the group watched as he was taken away. Losing a team member shook everyone's morale, but also reinforced the mission's gravity. Ethan looked at the remaining team members and said firmly, "We knew this would be tough, but we're here for something bigger. Let's keep going." They moved forward, now more alert, but also more determined. The jungle didn't forgive mistakes, but Ethan knew that to reach Kivu, they would need to face every obstacle with courage and resilience. Ethan took the lead, his eyes sharp for any movement. His thoughts were fixed on Kivu. With each step, his heart beat faster, as if something was pulling him toward that reunion. Suddenly, a deep, resonant sound cut through the forest silence, a growl, familiar, powerful. Ethan stopped immediately, raising his hand to signal everyone to stay quiet. He held his breath, trying to hear better. There it was again. That sound wasn't from just any animal. It was a growl he knew well, a sound that made his heart tighten with both emotion and fear. "Kivu," Ethan whispered, almost without realizing it. He looked around, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. The jungle seemed frozen in that moment. The team watched him in silence, fully aware of the gravity of the situation. Ethan took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the dense vegetation. Every movement was slow and deliberate, as if he feared scaring away the chance he had been waiting for. Then the vegetation parted. There, by the edge of a small river, stood Kivu. He looked larger, stronger, his presence commanding the space around him. His broad shoulders and muscular chest were evidence of how well he had adapted to life in the wild. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, admiring Kivu's imposing figure. He looked like a king in his domain, completely in tune with the jungle surrounding him. But Kivu saw him too. His eyes, deep as the night, met Ethan's. Time seemed to stand still. Ethan felt his heart race, his palms sweating. He didn't know what to expect. Would Kivu recognize him? Or would he see him as a stranger, perhaps even a threat? He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. "Kivu," he called softly, his voice filled with hope. It was just one word, but it carried years of memories and emotions. Kivu tilted his head slightly, as if trying to decipher something. Ethan took a cautious step forward. He knew every movement had to convey calm and trust. The gorilla stood still, watching him intently. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Ethan felt the eyes of his team on him, but in that moment it was just him and Kivu. "Kivu, it's me," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. He slowly knelt, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. For a moment everything went silent, except for the gentle sound of the river's water. Then something happened. Kivu took a step forward, then another. His eyes, once filled with caution, began to change. There was a glimmer in them, something Ethan recognized instantly. Memory. When Kivu was just a few meters away, he stopped again. Ethan remained motionless, his heart pounding so hard he thought the gorilla might hear it. Then, suddenly, Kivu let out a loud cry, a sound that echoed through the jungle, sending birds in nearby trees flying away in fright. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, bracing for the worst. But instead of feeling danger, he felt something unexpected, a gentle touch on his shoulder. Ethan opened his eyes and saw Kivu extending his hand. The gorilla's face, once serious, now carried an expression of recognition. "You remember me," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. Tears began to well up in his eyes as he slowly stood. Kivu made a low, almost purring sound, and then, without hesitation, pulled Ethan into a tight embrace. The warmth of that embrace, the mixture of strength and tenderness, was overwhelming. Ethan felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Relief, joy, love. He gently stroked Kivu's back, whispering words of affection, as if trying to make up for the years of separation. For a moment, nothing else mattered. The jungle around them, the challenges they had faced, all of it faded away. In that embrace, there were only Ethan and Kivu, two friends reconnecting a bond that had never been broken. The team members, who had remained still and alert, relaxed at the sight of the scene. Some couldn't hold back their tears, moved by the extraordinary reunion. It was a moment none of them would forget, a testament to the power of love and trust to overcome time and distance. Kivu pulled back slightly, looking at Ethan as if trying to convey something. For Ethan, this was more than a reunion. It was a miracle, a second chance. He realized that in this moment he had found not only Kivu, but also a part of himself. Ethan stood there, trying to process what was happening. He saw Kivu turn his head toward the dense vegetation behind him, and in response to his silent call, something extraordinary occurred. Emerging from the forest came other gorillas, first an adult female, then another, and finally 3 curious young ones watching Ethan with a mix of caution and intrigue. Ethan's heart swelled with wonder. He stood still, watching Kivu's family approach slowly. The females were imposing but maintained some distance, as if assessing the safety of the situation. The young ones, however, displayed a natural curiosity, peeking out from behind the females and occasionally leaping forward before retreating quickly. Kivu looked at Ethan and gave a small nod as if to say, "These are mine." Ethan smiled, a mixture of pride and gratitude washing over him. He had left Kivu in the jungle 5 years ago, uncertain of how the gorilla would adapt to the wild. Now he stood before not just a survivor, but a leader, a protector, a father. Ethan began to observe the family's behavior more closely. He noticed how Kivu moved among them with authority, yet with a gentleness that was almost human. When one of the young ones ventured too far, Kivu let out a low sound, and the little one quickly returned to the safety of the females. It was clear that he cared for his family with both firmness and affection. The females, in turn, kept the young ones close, but occasionally cast quick glances at Kivu, as if seeking his approval before making any movement. The dynamic between them was fascinating, almost like a silent dance of mutual respect and protection. Ethan realized that every gesture, every sound, carried meaning. They were a unit, a true group where each member played a crucial role. As he watched, Ethan was reminded of his own experiences with Kivu when he was just a young gorilla. He recalled moments of care, play and the bond they had formed. Now he saw Kivu replicating those same gestures with his own family. It was as if the love and trust Ethan had shared with Kivu had been passed on, an invisible legacy. Sitting on a nearby log, Ethan let the emotions flood over him. He reflected on the strength of familial bonds, not just among humans but in the wild as well. There stood Kivu, a gorilla who had faced the jungle, learned its rules, and thrived, leading his own family with courage and wisdom. Ethan felt a profound respect for him, not just as a friend, but as an example of resilience and leadership. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan began to feel like he was part of the moment. The young gorillas, realizing he wasn't a threat, started to come closer, watching him with curious eyes. One even dared to touch his leg before scurrying back to the safety of the females. Kivu, ever vigilant, observed the interaction calmly, as if to say, "I trust you, but don't forget I'm here." For Ethan, that day was more than a reunion. It was a living lesson on the importance of bonds, protection, and shared love. In Kivu and his family, he saw a reflection of what truly matters in life, taking care of one another, even in the face of the greatest challenges. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Ethan knew that moment would remain etched in his memory forever. He looked at Kivu and smiled. "You've done an incredible job here, my friend," he said, his heart overflowing with pride and gratitude. Kivu responded with a gentle touch on Ethan's shoulder, as if acknowledging his words. In that instant, Ethan didn't just see a gorilla and his family. He saw an example of strength, unity, and the beauty of life in its purest form. The jungle might be challenging, but in that moment, it seemed to reveal its most sublime side. The afternoon in the jungle felt calm. The group was scattered, exploring the surroundings under Kivu's guidance. Ethan felt the humid warmth of the forest, but also an unexpected tranquility as he watched Kivu and his family. However, this peace was suddenly interrupted by a shift in the air. The sky, once bright with sunlight, began to fill with dark clouds advancing rapidly. The light breeze turned into strong winds, carrying a clear warning. A storm was forming. The guides exchanged worried looks, and Ethan felt the weight of the situation. The jungle, already challenging, became even more perilous during a storm. He glanced at Kivu, who also seemed to sense the change. The gorilla let out a low sound and began moving urgently, signaling it was time to find shelter. Ethan gestured for the team to follow, trusting Kivu's instinct and knowledge of the environment. The winds began to howl through the trees, and the sound of thunder echoed in the distance. The first raindrops fell, quickly turning into a heavy downpour. Water streamed through the leaves, creating instant rivulets on the forest floor. Every step became harder. The mud clung to their boots, and visibility was severely reduced. Despite the challenges, Kivu led the way with determination, his movements steady and confident. After several minutes, Kivu guided them to a massive fallen tree, its exposed roots forming a natural shelter. He indicated for everyone to gather there. Ethan and the team quickly settled in, trying to protect their equipment and themselves from the rain. Kivu's family joined them, the young ones huddling close to the females, who watched the humans cautiously. The storm raged around them, thunder booming as if directly overhead. Ethan was drenched, but he couldn't help noticing how Kivu remained calm. The gorilla sat near the entrance of the shelter, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Occasionally, he emitted soft sounds, seemingly to reassure his family. It was an act of leadership that deeply impressed Ethan. As the rain continued to pour, Ethan felt one of the young gorillas snuggle up beside his leg. He glanced at Kivu, who watched attentively but showed no signs of distrust. The simple gesture of the young gorilla seeking comfort brought an unexpected warmth to Ethan's heart. He gently stroked the little one's fur, an act of mutual care that felt almost natural. Time passed slowly in the shelter. Ethan looked around and realized that, despite the differences between them, humans and gorillas, there was something universal in that moment: the instinct to protect and care for those we love. Kivu demonstrated this with every glance, every sound he made to his family. Ethan felt an even stronger connection to the gorilla, as if the storm had strengthened the bond between them. When the rain finally began to subside and the thunder rolled into the distance, the jungle seemed renewed. The faint light of the sun started breaking through the clouds, reflecting off the droplets clinging to the leaves. Kivu was the first to step out of the shelter, carefully inspecting the surroundings before signaling his family to follow. Ethan and the team rose as well, ready to continue. Before they departed, Ethan looked at Kivu and smiled. "You protected us in there, my friend," he said softly, knowing Kivu might not understand the words, but would certainly feel the sentiment. The gorilla responded with a calm gaze and a low sound, as if acknowledging Ethan's gratitude. The storm had been intense, but for Ethan, it had brought something invaluable: the certainty that the bond he shared with Kivu was stronger than any challenge the jungle could impose. As they moved forward, he felt that somehow the jungle had brought them even closer, revealing that even storms could uncover the strength of what truly matters. When the storm finally passed, the air in the jungle felt different. There was a fresh scent, as though the rain had washed away not just the trees and the soil, but also the worries that had lingered in the atmosphere. Kivu emerged from the shelter first, moving cautiously to check the surroundings. Ethan watched the gorilla with admiration. Kivu seemed entirely at home, a true guardian of that territory. After a few moments, Kivu let out a deep, short sound, a call to his family and to Ethan. It was as if he were saying, "Follow me." Ethan exchanged a glance with the guides and followed the gorilla, trusting fully in his leadership. Kivu moved with purpose, cutting through the dense vegetation effortlessly. The group struggled to keep up, but Ethan felt they were being led to a special place. Along the way, Kivu stopped at various spots, as if he wanted to show Ethan important details of his world. At one point, he led them to a clearing where fruit trees grew abundantly. Kivu's young ones ran ahead, climbing the trees with agility, picking ripe fruit, and sharing it with the females. Kivu stood still for a moment, looking at Ethan as if to say, "This is one of the places that sustains us." Ethan smiled, watching the harmony of the scene. He thought about how Kivu had learned not only to care for himself but also for his family. It was a silent lesson in responsibility and leadership, something that resonated deeply with Ethan. He mentally noted every detail, knowing that these moments were more than simple observations. They were revelations about what it meant to live in balance with the environment. As they continued, Kivu led them to a small stream of crystal-clear water that wound through the jungle. The young gorillas played in the water, splashing and laughing like human children. Ethan knelt by the bank, placing his hand in the cool, clear water. He looked at Kivu, who stood in the middle of the stream watching over his family. In that moment, Ethan saw something he couldn't put into words: a profound calm, an unbreakable connection between Kivu and this place. After hours of walking, Kivu brought them to a location unlike anything Ethan had seen before. It was a larger clearing, dominated by a massive rock that rose like a natural throne. Kivu climbed the rock with steady steps, stopping at the top. He turned to Ethan and studied him for a moment before gazing out at the jungle. It was as if he were saying, "This is my place. This is my home." Ethan stood still, looking up at Kivu atop the rock. The sunlight filtering through the trees illuminated the gorilla in an almost divine way. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. It was a symbolic moment, something he would never forget. Kivu wasn't just showing him a place. He was sharing a part of himself, a piece of his life and soul. "This is your kingdom," Ethan murmured, more to himself than anyone else. He knew this moment was a gift, a glimpse into a world few humans ever had the chance to witness. Kivu, with his commanding presence, seemed to say, "I belong here, and this place belongs to me." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, Ethan felt a mix of emotions. He was proud of Kivu, of the leader he had become, but he also felt a deep humility for being there, a guest in a world so vast and mysterious. Kivu's rock was more than just a landmark in his territory. It was a symbol of everything he had achieved and everything he meant to this place. When Kivu descended from the rock and rejoined his family, Ethan knew that day had changed something within him. He now understood more than ever the importance of protecting this territory, not just for Kivu, but for everything he represented: strength, resilience, and the beauty of living in harmony with nature. As the sunlight dimmed, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, the day drew to a close. Ethan knew this was the moment he had dreaded since the beginning of the expedition. After so many days sharing moments with Kivu and his family, it was time to say goodbye. He looked around, taking in the scene that had become so familiar yet so extraordinary. The jungle buzzed with life, but for Ethan, the most important sound came from Kivu's soft grunts and the quiet movements of his family. The team began organizing their equipment, preparing for the journey back to camp, but Ethan didn't move. He remained still, watching Kivu, who sat just a few meters away, surrounded by his young ones. The gorilla seemed to sense something was different. He wasn't playing as he had before. He simply observed Ethan in silence, his deep eyes fixed on the man he had reunited with after so many years. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling a lump in his throat. He knew that for Kivu, goodbyes weren't natural. In the jungle, everything followed a continuous rhythm without pauses or interruptions. But for him, this moment felt like a rupture, something he wished he could avoid but knew was necessary. "Hey, my friend," Ethan said softly, approaching slowly. His voice was calm but laden with emotion. Kivu turned his head, his eyes shining with a mix of curiosity and what Ethan interpreted as understanding. He knelt to be closer to Kivu's height. "I have to go now, but I promise I'll be back. You'll always be a part of me." Kivu remained still for a few seconds, perhaps processing Ethan's words or absorbing the energy of the moment. Then he stepped forward and extended his massive hand, gently touching Ethan's shoulder with a tenderness that seemed impossible for such a large animal. It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning. Ethan felt tears welling up in his eyes, but tried to hold back his emotions. Kivu's family watched from a distance, as if they understood the importance of the moment. The young ones approached timidly, one of them briefly touching Ethan's leg before retreating again. Ethan chuckled softly, even as his heart ached. "You have an incredible leader," he said, looking at Kivu. Finally, Ethan stood up. He knew that lingering would only make it harder to leave. Kivu followed him with his gaze as he began to walk away. With every step, Ethan felt as though he was leaving a piece of himself behind. When he reached the edge of the river, he stopped and turned one last time. Kivu stood there, surrounded by his family, but his eyes remained fixed on Ethan. "See you soon, my friend," Ethan said, raising a hand in farewell. His voice was thick with emotion, but he tried to smile. Kivu let out a low sound, almost a lament, which echoed through the jungle. To Ethan, that sound was both a goodbye and a promise, a reminder that, even separated by distance, their bond was unbreakable. As Ethan stepped into the boat that would take him back to camp, he couldn't take his eyes off Kivu. The gorilla stood on the riverbank, watching as the boat slowly drifted away. His imposing figure seemed to blend with the jungle's landscape, as though he was an inseparable part of that world. Ethan knew he was leaving something precious behind, but also felt a deep certainty. He would return. As the boat moved farther away and the sounds of the jungle began to fade, Ethan knew this journey had marked his life in a way few experiences ever could. But the reunion with Kivu wasn't just a story about a special bond. It was a reminder of how the connection between living beings can transcend barriers, overcoming time and distance. And you, what did you think of this touching story? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts. We'd love to know what moved you the most in this journey. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to follow more incredible stories like this one. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.